Max, Nicholas, good to see you guys.
Hey, Will.
Great to see you.
So this is Meeting of the Minds number 1. The interview is with Mike Sutton. And Mike, we know through you, Nicholas, and we've actually invested in his latest venture, which we don't really touch on in the interview. We touch on his past successes, specifically 2, a multi-unit restaurant concept called Ojos, Locos, and a retail concept around soap called Buff City. Both pretty unusual for independent sponsor land, both very successful. Max, what struck you about this conversation with Mike?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I thought Mike clearly in the past has found opportunities that others have overlooked. With traditional private equity not always wanting to invest in restaurants and retail, Mike has really leaned into that. And it also sounds like he's found great operators that have helped him scale those operations. They're multi-unit operations that require a lot of infrastructure. That just takes a lot of work, and it takes a smart team to do that over and over again. So I was impressed. I mean, it's not your everyday sort of independent sponsor story. So he finds value in things that others are not always willing to take a risk on. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. What do you think, Nicholas? You know Mike from a number of years now.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been a number of years, but one thing I regret from us interviewing him here a few weeks ago is that we didn't spend a little bit more time on him going scuba diving with the orcas. To me, that's just so awesome that he actually did that. The way that came about is I posted about a year ago, I was on a sailboat with my good friend in Norway from 20 years, Andreas, and in the text somewhere, I think I wrote that Andreas is an Arctic explorer and goes scuba diving with orcas. So I was on the phone with Mike a few months later, and he randomly brought up this post, and he's like, "That's so cool. Do you think you could introduce me to Andreas? I would love to go scuba diving with orcas." So I did, and lo and behold, I didn't hear much more. But a few months later, suddenly Mike and Andreas have connected, and they're going to go in the dead of winter, January, in the way north of Norway, well within the polar circle. They're going to go scuba diving with orcas. I believe they had a fantastic time. I've talked to both of them here in the last few weeks, and Mike sent me a photo that we need to include in the show notes. But that was just so awesome for both Andreas and for Mike that they were connected and got something so cool out of it.
So he lived. He did survive.
He did survive, yes. And then as far as the interview itself, I was really trying to nail down, what is your secret sauce, Mike? Because he's obviously smart. He's done the work. He has the credentials. He has the results. But I was trying to, what is the one sentence that describes Mike as an independent sponsor that makes him differentiated and unique and helps him outperform? And I suppose to my surprise, I wasn't quite able to nail it down to one word or one sentence. I think we learned through the interview that there are many factors at play here. There's a lot of blocking and tackling. There is an eye for overlooked opportunities, as he says himself, but nothing very particular that stood out. It's just, grinding every day, doing the hard work. When you have a concept that works, just keep going at it, and really good success and big success in his case comes out of it, as he shares quite generously in numbers also with us. Yeah. What did you think, Will?
Well, on the overlooked opportunities bit, I tend to weight that a lot in his story, in both Ojos, Locos and Buff City, but Buff City in particular, I don't remember the numbers, but it was a very small business, well below the threshold that your typical independent sponsor would consider. And Mike himself talks about kind of dismissing it a number of times for precisely that reason, being too small. But you'll hear how he talks about getting more and more familiarity with the business, and I guess what was it? I think it was customers raved about the product and kept buying more, and so that's what ultimately tipped him. Anyway, the point is, it was, he bet on something really, really small, had either the vision or the risk appetite or the ability to see fundamentals in a way that maybe other independent sponsors don't, because it was really an unusual bet, and he was rewarded for that handsomely.
No, absolutely. I mean, that deal sounded like it was smaller than a lot of deals we would consider at Minds Capital.
It was five. I think it was 5 million EV, just to put it out there.
Yeah. So very, small, maybe at the smallest end of what we would consider, but nonetheless, very small for an independent sponsor. Those EV ranges are much higher typically on average. So, but clearly he had the vision. He mentioned that it wasn't recurring revenue, but it was very likely to reoccur by the customers because they love the soap so much. So great vision, not something that I would necessarily have had the vision to go after, but kudos to him for doing that.
Great. Well, let's get to the interview. Mike Sutton, a recent sponsor that Minds Capital is invested in, here recounting his stories with Ojos, Locos, and Buff City. Meeting of the Minds, episode 1. Please enjoy. Welcome to Meeting of the Minds, your connection to the growing world of independent sponsors and deal-by-deal private equity. We are your hosts, Will Smith and Nicholas James. Today, Nicholas and I are thrilled to have Mike Sutton, based in Dallas, in Texas, and Charlottesville, Virginia. Mike is an independent sponsor and the founder of Guideboat Capital Partners. Prior to becoming an independent sponsor, Mike worked in banking for a hedge fund, started agricultural businesses in Colombia, and spent time as an investor at multiple family offices. Guideboat, his now firm, was launched in 2018, named for a vessel that Mike navigated down the Buffalo River in Arkansas. Now, Mike's focus is on identifying and scaling opportunities that are a little outside the mainstream industries and target areas typical of independent sponsors and private equity. His first 4 deals were multi-location concepts, including restaurant chains Ojos, Locos, and Twin Peaks. And then later, a soap franchisor, Buff City. That one, Buff City, grew from $5 million to north of $300 million in enterprise value under Mike's stewardship. Mike Sutton, welcome to Meeting of the Minds.
Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys having me.
Well, before we get into the meat of things, Mike, I understand that you're going scuba diving in the Arctic in the dead of winter. If you would explain yourself, please.
I'm going to blame a Norwegian buddy of mine who I suspect we all might know. I'm not even sure I remember anymore how it came up, but Nicholas was kind enough to make an introduction to a guy that has a boat that hangs out up in the northern fjords of Norway, and I didn't even know it was possible, but they said, "Look, if you want to go diving with orcas, we can make it happen." And
does it have to happen in the winter? Is that orca season?
Yeah. So what I understand is they're down there feeding on cod, and so that's when you have the opportunity to see them. I think that group or that pod goes north after once it gets into the spring. So you've got a window of opportunity, and let's hope there's plenty of cod so they aren't still hungry when we hang out there.
I'm very excited for you, and this might be one of those episodes where we're recording this episode here today, and hopefully you'll still be alive when we publish it in a few weeks.
Yep, that's the goal.
Well, it sounds really cool, Mike, and good to see that my partner here, Nicholas, has influence in weird and interesting ways on people other than just in the business landscape. Completely. Let's get into your history a little bit, Mike. One of the things that you said about yourself on the pre-call, which grabbed our attention, was that you wouldn't call yourself a great employee historically. You're much better, more comfortable being an entrepreneur. What did you mean by that? Tell us more about that, kind of, so we understand the man here.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I still struggle for exactly the right way to respond to it. And it's one of those where when you meet other entrepreneurs, you have kind of a common refrain with each other because they've gone through similar things. The amount of guys I've talked to said, I was a terrible employee, and now they're phenomenally successful at their own business. I mean, I think it's just something built in, intrinsically into a personality. And I'm sure I didn't help myself along the way. But I think there's some people, and at least I suppose describing myself, just not particularly struggle with authority a little bit. Want to just get things done is I think something really common that I see in good operators and good entrepreneurs. And being an employee, especially in a large organization, can be an impediment to that, and it's frustrating, and it takes away from the drive you have. And so it just naturally is a great fit to be on the side where we are now. It feels right, and allows me to, I think, get along very well with the folks that lead our businesses, because I share quite a bit more with them than probably other folks on the finance side.
Do you think that most independent sponsors see themselves as investors more or entrepreneurs more?
I think there's such a graying of who's coming into the space that there's folks where it's a blending of, kind of ETA into independent sponsorship. And there's folks who've come from let's call it a bigger shop, private equity firm or otherwise, that see themselves more of an investor. And so I meet a lot of other independent sponsors along the way. And you see a pretty wide spectrum there. It's unique. It's interesting.
So you have pretty incredible credentials that as we'll discuss here earlier. And it's a little hard to believe that you were in fact a bad employee, but let's take that for a fact. If you are a good employee, is that in any way a disadvantage as you become an independent sponsor?
The thing is, I love good employees, because on the side I'm on, I just want people who are great employees. And I think there's a lot of great employees who also have the potential to be, great entrepreneurs, and maybe are a little bit more flexible. While I've met great entrepreneurs who are bad employees, I've also met really good ones who were, very successful as employees and taking a paycheck before that. So I certainly don't think it precludes you.
Well, so you have done a number of deals by now, and the first one you did was Ojos, Locos. I'm not sure I got the pronunciation right, but you have some backstory having worked in Latin America. This concept was, in a way, hand in glove for you as an independent sponsor. The capital process, even though it was your first deal, you raised that money pretty quickly. Could you tell us more about this story and where you took it from and where you took it to?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the short version of the story. But as you mentioned, I worked in Latin America for about 4 years. And when I first got introduced to the founder and operator of Ojos, I think he was having a bit of a tough time, getting traction with everything from lenders to equity and real estate. And, when I met him at the original location, I walked in and I was like, oh, I completely get this. Like, I know exactly what you're doing here. This makes sense because it's very familiar to me from what I experienced living in Colombia. And true to form, he had built that business for a very specific demographic, a very specific audience. It was very genuine to them, and they did a phenomenal job at it. So it resonated with me, whereas I think the average investor walks in and is, either turned off or doesn't think it's investable.
And so by that, you mean the average independent sponsor or private equity guy, they tend to shy away from retail and especially restaurants. And so this is a chain and a little bit of a abnormal one. And for that reason alone, people would turn it out. But for you, you walked in and saw, here's an opportunity. I get what it is. And taking it from where it is to the next level, you could crystallize that in your head pretty quickly then.
Yeah, I think it's actually exponential because it's a restaurant that sells more alcohol than food, that's focused on a blue collar demographic. It has an all female wait staff. I mean, I think most people looked at it and said, I don't know how you invest in this business. And I think we've built our foundation, even before Guideboat, loved looking for unique opportunities, and we really built Guideboat around looking for businesses that some folks may not want to invest in for one reason or another. It's not trendy, or they see some kind of hair on it, and sometimes we find gems. And Ojos is one of those. The numbers and the fundamentals of the business were absolutely incredible. I still to this day, I think restaurant investing is terrible, but love this business, love the leaders. The founder of that business is an incredible guy, still buddies with him to this day. And, it made it far easier to invest in that, knowing how successful they were with it, knowing that we had an incredible leader there. So, I was able to look past, I think, a lot of the issues that other folks saw, and fortunately got it done.
Mike, but say a little bit more about when you walked in and saw it, you really understood the product market fit and how even your time in Colombia kind of informed that. So, and maybe while answering, paint a picture of exactly who the demographic, what the concept here is and why it works and why others might not understand why it works so well.
Yeah. So basically it's a sports bar, primarily for a first or possibly second generation Mexican blue collar demographic, and that is who they focus on. I'm certainly open to anybody who walks in the door, but that's what they built it for. So you go in there, and it's the beers that Mexican demo wants to drink. You're not going to find any golf or college basketball on the TVs. It's soccer, boxing, UFC. It is just very, very specific to them, and they own it. And that demographic loves that business. It feels like it's home for them, especially being away from home. And it just really resonates with them. And I understood it very well when I walked in there, because it reminded me of being in Colombia, which is different. I won't go down that path. That's Colombians, Mexicans, not the same, but share a lot of similarities.
But it was also your having lived in Colombia and known what it was to be an expat, the value of having an oasis where people can go and feel at home. It was also that.
100%. It is exactly that, and I think that's what it represents for the demographic, and the loyalty factor on that group is extraordinarily high too. And so if you give them decent service and decent food, they're going to come back time and time again, and it was true to form.
And so here you have restaurants are terrible businesses, you say, but here you walk in and you can very clearly see that they own a particular niche. So when you say we look for gems, was that the crux of this gem, or how did you define it? You mentioned earlier that you saw metrics that were astonishing with this business. So what was it here that made you go from, hey, but restaurants are terrible, to, wow, this is a real gem with super scalability behind it?
Yeah. Well, I certainly think restaurants are, we obviously did very well on our restaurant investments, but I have never made any sense, because they will never measure up to Ojos, Locos, or Twin Peaks. It's just hard to repeat, what they've done there. The metrics that really stood out to me, without going too deep into a bunch of numbers or financial jargon, I suppose, is that they were able to create these businesses. If you think about each individual unit as a business, for about 2 to 3 times EBITDA, and I think early days even better than that. And so we were able to build these and create them at numbers that provided significant returns each time we opened one up. And the consistency of being able to do that was there throughout, that organization. And so it made it highly investable, certainly from the fundamentals.
And speaking of being investable, the capital that you used to do this deal, talk to us about where that came from, being a first timer at this point in your career.
Yeah. I've been unabashed about saying whenever I started Guideboat, I was pretty good, I think, at finding opportunities and executing on them and working with teams, post close being a partner. But everywhere I've been had a bunch of capital. I never had to worry about it. And so, I was, the dog that caught the car. Great business. No lenders willing to lend on it. So needed a bunch of cash. And, really, fortunately, I over time have built good relationships with, a lot of different folks. And I was lucky enough in this case to be able to pick up the phone and call some buddies that were up in the city who had just left their firm's very large shop and started one. And I said, look, I have this business. I think it's incredible. Here's my diligence. I need a lot of money. And they're like, all right, I'll send it over. Call me the next day. They're like, this is a good business. All right, cool, we're in. And there was a lot in between that and closing, obviously. But had it not been for already knowing them, I don't think it ever would have been that easy. And it's certainly never been that easy since. But a bit lucky there, and it certainly helped to have built those relationships. But extraordinarily thankful for those guys. Phenomenal dudes, and still buddies to this day.
Is that the takeaway, Mike? I mean, Nicholas and I just had a separate conversation with somebody in the space talking about how capital is actually getting tighter and scarcer. And one of the challenges that independent sponsors run into is indeed raising capital. So raising how much you did as a first timer with a single phone call, is there anything to be learned from that? Or is it just the power of these guys believing in you because of years of experience, years of relationship already being there?
Yeah, absolutely nothing to learn from that. That was just luck.
Okay. But so wait, so this was one call, and it took one day to get a yes. And this was, if I remember correctly, a $5 million EBITDA business, right? So the check here must have been pretty big and very decisive in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, the check was pretty big. There's no leverage on it. We also funded cash to the balance sheet, so we had put quite a bit into it.
So we're looking at a significant 8-digit amount here that was invested based on one call in one day. And you're saying that it was because you were lucky, but truly you had built a strong relationship here before, and I have to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I probably don't give myself as much credit for that. We had built a good relationship. We had looked at opportunities together, and I think they realized that I wasn't going to go pursue something that was foolish or dumb. So there was no problem getting them to pick up the phone, and once they read through the materials, they got it pretty quickly too, which was great.
And so you closed the deal with more or less a one-stop shop capital provider. You found a gem in a terrible space. What happened from there, and how did you make it a success?
Yeah, certainly a journey, because I mean, we bought that business in 2018. It was really cool, actually. As a side note, we bought it right before World Cup in 2018, and you probably don't remember any games from the 2018 World Cup, but that is the year that Mexico beat Germany. So probably a week after closing, I go to Ojos, Locos, original location. I can't even get inside. I'm in the overflow tent. The last thing I'm ever going to do is, you do know who I am, which they probably would have been like, no, and get out. So I'm in the overflow tent, and they win that game, and it's just mayhem. So it was a pretty cool start to that business. But we grew that business just through repeating the process and the playbook of finding areas where our demographic lived and delivering, the same concept and same experience every single time. And it worked out phenomenally. Obviously, we went through COVID. A restaurant business through COVID gives you, still have some PTSD over that. But we were fortunate enough to be based in Texas and Arizona at that time, which both opened up really quickly. So while it felt like an eternity, I looked back at the numbers the other day, and we still generated pretty good positive EBITDA, in 2020.
And where did you get it to ultimately?
We got the business into kind of the mid 20s EBITDA, and that was largely just through growing organically. We had one tech in of a knockoff, converted those over to our model. but it was just, a model, especially in, multi-unit side. If you've got a good return model, and this business is, you're just looking for the right space. You're just trying to, recreate these at, 2 to 3 times EBITDA. And it works phenomenally well.
So so you took this business from 5 to call it 25 of EBITDA during your whole period. And in this case, it was a matter of opening more locations, but really just organically continuing what they were already doing. You weren't adding capabilities or pivoting the business model or changing it dramatically in any way. You were continuing what they were doing. A question that I sometimes get when I see situations like that: what would have happened to the business if you hadn't been in it? What were the things that you did different that nobody else would have done? If the founder just continued as he was, what do you think would have occurred?
I think that's a great question. I think they would have grown, one new location a year, and been satisfied with it. Maybe not satisfied, but that's what would have happened.
As opposed to how many did you open?
I think we, on average, opened 4 or 5 a year. So a lot of what we did, if you really get into it, was help build the business for scale. We had a phenomenal leader in that business, and we never changed the business model. And no matter how many times I came up with harebrained ideas, fortunately, Rich just looked at me and very patiently said, "That's great. I've thought about that," or "We've tried it, and no, it doesn't work." And I eventually just learned Rich has the model dialed in. We just need to help support him in that business for building scale. So we did quite a bit, added a COO to the business. On the capital side, we pursued a lot of opportunities of just buying and building real estate on our own, and then executing sale-leaseback programs, which, with a model that has fundamentals like this, worked incredibly well. We opened up a lot of doors just to be able to generate that growth, which is a little stunted before because it was, a tough use case for some areas. Right as we were leaving, we had an interesting situation, which I won't dive too far into, but, security was a big expense item in that business, as it should be. There were some really interesting learnings out of that of, what a contract might say and what actually happens in reality. That's a broad subject, but even here, specifically, we learned some things. And long story short, we actually ended up hiring, someone who had a long tenure in law enforcement at the FBI, and actually started building our own security teams in-house, which is, I think, pretty unique, and you probably don't see that until you get to the scale of casinos or something much larger. But
and this is security to prevent fights.
yeah, exactly.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, just confirm.
Yeah. You gotta keep people in check.
Okay. And Mike, indulge me in the sale leaseback and how you leverage that. I just had a separate interview where somebody leveraged sale leaseback brilliantly for their first acquisition, for their platform acquisition. How did you guys take advantage of it? And if you kind of walk us through it real quick.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously it takes a little longer to build something ground up, and we loved being able to just convert boxes, but a lot of times they just weren't there. And so we'd go out, we'd look for a good parcel in an area that worked for us. We'd fully build out, the improvements there. What we were able to do, especially because the economics of Ojos were so good, was to put enough rent on it that didn't overly burden the business, but that exiting at, even pretty modest cap rates back then, I believe kind of 6 to 7% or so, we were typically able to pay for all of, if not the majority of the cost that we had, into those boxes. And so ultimately, we even had some situations where, we owned the business at a negative multiple. Basically, we paid ourselves to own a stream of cash flow. Wow. It's a fantastic model when it works. Obviously, a lot of guys have done it with success. Some have, unfortunately killed businesses. So I think you got to be really careful about it. But it worked incredibly well during our tenure there.
As if you look at a return profile, you quintupled EBITDA, but you probably had some, since it was all equity as a deal, or at least close to all equity, you probably had some distributions, and you had a sidearm with sale leaseback, and then you had an exit, hopefully at a higher multiple than you paid up front. So what did it look like from a returns perspective?
Yeah, we did have some distributions along the way. Had a couple dividend recaps, and then ultimately exited. We didn't have an enormous amount of multiple expansion there. I think it's relatively tough business to buy still, but the returns worked out very well. We'll say that everybody was happy.
I can imagine.
And quintupling EBITDA didn't result in a lot of multiple expansion, you think, because this category, people just can't get beyond their prejudice?
Yeah, it's about right.
Mm-hmm.
And it just is what it is. I think we went into it knowing that there was not going to be, or a belief that there may not be an enormous amount of multiple expansion. Now, we did get some, don't get me wrong. I think there was at least 2 or 3 turns of multiple expansion, so it wasn't nothing. But certainly we created the majority of the value in that business just through increasing EBITDA.
Yeah. So how many units did you start with, and how many units did you sell at? Did you guys have in total when you sold?
Yeah, there were about 8 units when we bought it. And we were up into sort of the mid to high 20s by the time we sold it.
Why did you decide then to sell? What was the timing there?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think we would have been happy to stay in it. What we had done was created a lot of value. We had a very good equity incentive program for a lot of employees in that business, where it was worth a lot of money on paper, and a lot of folks wanted to see that converted to cash. We also sold in 2022. Valuations were very high. There was demand there for it, so we took the opportunity to go ahead and sell it. We still own a piece of it, and happy to, but we were pretty excited about being able to pay out some very significant cash rewards, because of the PI units that we had granted to folks, and people that were even, middle managers making 7 figures. So that's always exciting to see.
Well, and for your first deal, you needed to get a win on the board.
Agree. I don't know if that's a question, but yes.
Thank you.
I think it's a great thing. I'll expand on that a little bit. So, I think the most important thing with our first deal, and certainly the way I've thought about it, and as I've met other guys along the way who are young and early and kind of starting, is what I commonly tell them is, don't worry about hitting a home run. Don't worry about getting the best economics possible. Just make sure you get something done, you build your reputation, you show that you have high integrity, you're a prudent individual, and you make people money. It doesn't have to be a fortune, but you're going to get a lot more shots on goal in the future if you have a great outcome on the first one. And so that's certainly played out for us, and we've been able to leverage that and build a reputation that I'm really thankful for, and then some of that was due to Ojos.
Well, in your intro, you mentioned that Buff City had gone from 5 million of enterprise value to north of 300 million under Guideboat's guidance, and that doesn't happen every day to any company. We're only talking a few years of ownership here. There are thousands of retail concepts out there. Mike, what made Buff City so special? Well, what was the magic you performed to make this happen?
Yeah, I think Buff's a cool business. I mean, really, that started with a very passionate founder who's a great guy, and you couldn't make up a better set of tailwinds for a business. I mean, this is not a guy who was a McKinsey or a Bain guy. I think he was like an AMT before he did this. And he started making soap in his garage. I oftentimes joke that it's kind of like Fight Club, only like a modern day plant-based version, no human fats. But he started making soap in his garage and moved to a farmer's market, and then like the back of a bowling alley, and it just like bootstrapped just naturally. Like there was just so much demand for it. it was plant-based. It was all made in store, locally sourced the best they could, all ingredients locally sourced best they could. I mean, everything just, resonated. It still resonates now, but, even certainly a handful of years ago, that had every tailwind behind it. So we bought, the short version of the story is we bought that business. It was really just a pretty skeleton team. It was largely him and his wife running it. And he loved the product side, but we really needed to build a business around it. And so he allowed us to move the headquarters to Dallas. We actually moved it into our office for probably the first year and a half. We hired a team as quickly as we could. Myself and our team here were playing, Dutch boy and just trying to stick our finger in every hole as it was leaking because it was just growing so fast. And we were fortunate enough to also have the tailwind of COVID was actually incredibly good for that business. People were looking for, different things to buy. Soap just happened to be kind of one of them. And this was a unique soap with great scents. And, it's a little bit more of a sort of semi-luxury item, I guess. But we're just in the, again, right place, right time, built up the team, grew it incredibly quickly. It was a franchisor, so we were fortunate enough to have some guys jump into it very early with us that were very influential in their space. And so their activity in it with us begat a lot more folks coming in. And I think we had sold over 1,000 units within, 2 years. And within a few years after that, we had crossed, 200 units open across the U.S. So it was a hell of a journey. It was fortunately very profitable, but it's one where I would be more than happy to go a little bit slower next time.
But so here you have Ojos, Locos, and you have Buff City retail concepts. One selling food and beverage, another one selling soap, and you're able to scale them so insanely and also so fast. Again, these are not easy industries to be in. And how do you luck into opportunities like this, which you do you're a serial luck finder, so how do you do that?
Thanks for minimizing my skill, Nicholas. I'm totally kidding. So finding these, the story on Buff, funny enough, was that, it was based in Memphis when we found it. And I had someone call me up and mention that they had come across this kind of unique business and that I should go check it out. And I looked it up and I was like, I don't know, it looks like small and whatever. But I had some other company that I needed to go look at in Memphis. So I was like, okay, well, I'll go just because I have this other company. And I spent like 8 hours at this other company talking to them all day. And then I just go see Buff City in the afternoon. And again, I was still like, this is too small. And, I don't know if this is, going to work. And, but we kind of kept with it and just stayed close to them and kept peeling the layers back, and the business continued to perform well. And we finally said, you know what, let's just go ahead and do this and go ahead and acquire control of the business. And, we did, and the rest is history.
And what was it that do you think that finally convinced you? Because again, I think there's a similarity here between this and Ojos, where you see something that other people don't. But in this case, it sounds like you even had to convince yourself. It wasn't the love at first sight that Ojos was when you walked in the door. You had to convince yourself, but ultimately you did. You got there, and others who presumably looked at it could never get there.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I don't think anybody else looked at it. It was tiny. It was very, very under the radar. These were all kind of unbrokered deals, and so candidly, thinking back, it was really just about. Actually, I do remember now. We were on the fence of do we do this? Do we not? What is it? It's interesting, but it's small. And we ran one very rudimentary survey with the existing customer base. And we asked them who they're buying their products for. And 95% of people said they were buying it for themselves or their family. And what that told me was, you have a brand that people, and all of us use soap. You're going to continue to use soap. You're going to use a soap and then have to go back and get more. I would never call this a, recurring revenue business, but what I knew is we had a repeatable base of people who wanted to come back and continue using this as their main product. That resonated just extraordinarily to me because it told me this is not a business that is just purely transactional. It's not about being in a space where there's pedestrians walking by. People were driving out of their way to go to Buff City at that time, to buy soap for them and their family. And that was really powerful. That's something that I knew we could build off of. So that's what finally pushed us over the edge and said, let's go.
And how did you decide to continue with the franchise model, the brick and mortar model, as opposed to, every D2C brand today, or every CPG brand would be more at home online and just making this an e-commerce D2C play?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we've certainly leaned much further onto that side of the business lately. But a lot of people want to come in, especially for that first time, and actually have the experience of smelling it, the experience of seeing someone make it. You can still to this day walk up to the counter and say, can you make a soap with a loaf of soap with these fragrances and put these ingredients in it, still a common base. And I think that's unique in that I don't call myself, an expert on brick and mortar, but, I think intuitively you say, you have to have some sort of physical presence in order to offer that. I don't think a DTC company can replicate, what was driving a lot of the success of Buff City. So we leaned heavily into that. And what certainly worked since then is, we see e-commerce more as fulfillment. So it's someone who already knows what they want, if it's out of the way or they don't live, near a location, it's a way to get them the product that they already know they want. And it works well. It's growing still pretty quick.
But looking at these two success stories, and we actually jumped over Twin Peaks in the middle there, which was also probably a fairly analogous success story for you. But what part does marketing and your expertise in marketing play in all of this?
It's a good question. I do not consider myself some sort of master marketer by any means. I think we're good at understanding, what makes a business work, getting, the best team possible in place to go execute on that. And in the case of Buff City, we found a guy who had been in a large CPG brand. He's still in the business to this day. Great guy, great marketer. He was in their very early days. I think there's a lot of great folks in that space out there, and we can certainly solve for that. It's not me.
And Mike, what would you say about the difference? It was small, Buff City, very small, which is kind of another way of maybe saying immature, nascent. It's not an established. It's not fully established yet, and maybe arguably not even fully market tested yet. Not big enough to qualify for having kind of provable national scale product market fit. I'm putting words in your mouth. Correct me if all that's wrong. Assuming it's not. Talk about the differences between investing and building a business like that's so nascent versus one that has a format that clearly works, and your job is to just grow something that's already working.
Yeah. Also a really good question. In this case, we knew this business was going to take us a lot more time in getting our hands dirty. Whereas previous to that, Ojos and Twin Peaks, there was a lot of work to do there. But great teams, great leaders, great infrastructure to those businesses. This was, a box of receipts and a wonderful product. So we had to build the infrastructure of that business from ground up.
Yeah.
Everything. Even when we had bought it, they were taking orders, to supply some of their franchisees just email, so it'd come in piecemeal, and the founder's wife would redirect those, to the different vendors. It was that. It was that rudimentary, and she was under a lot of stress staying up, late every single night, doing that. And one of the things we said was, look, we're going to take this off your plate. And, and built out the systems to be able to handle that allowed the business to scale. So we spent looking back, it probably took us 18 months of our time that we couldn't really come up for air. Weren't looking for other opportunities. It was just all hands on deck for that business for 18 months. And, a bit of a tangent there. If you're going to spend 18 months and have almost, or significant portion of your focus be on one business, it better make a lot of damn money. Because the opportunity cost is too high not to. And so that's what factored into a lot of our early, thoughts there is it's just small and it takes a lot of work. But our belief looking back on it was that we had a pretty safe path or very reasonable path to a 10x, return. And then obviously it, eclipsed that, which was great, but we almost had to see kind of these ridiculous returns just to justify our time.
And Mike, how did you get comfortable saying to yourselves, there is a pretty clear path to 10x here, just because the TAM is enormous, everybody needs soap sort of argument?
Yeah, the TAM is enormous. We bought it right. We instantly had growth opportunities in that business. I mean, we closed it like with opportunities in place to grow it. There were guys on board, willing to build out that system very quickly.
Franchisees.
So, yeah, exactly. So it got off the ground extremely quickly. And any downside was really mitigated there. It was really just a function of, return on time at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think about an independent sponsor deal, it's more conventional. You buy it for 5, 6x, you lever it up by about 50% with debt, and then you continue to grow it at 10, 15, 20% per year. Hopefully that's more or less in line with the history. And that in itself, and maybe you tag on some add-ons and new product lines over a 5-year period, but that creates a 3 to 5 times your money and becomes a success story. And Will and I are really trying to get to, what was it about these that were so special? And you're talking about a huge total addressable market. You're talking about Rich, your operator, one of the best you've ever worked with. You're talking about solid marketing, but not necessarily, unique, but solid. And you talk about ROI on opening new locations, but what comes into my mind is actually it's less of the LBO model and more of a growth equity play. But where growth equity often plays in tech-enabled services and stuff that is very scalable because it's low CapEx, you're doing it here with brick and mortar soap stores and restaurants. How does that resonate?
Yeah, that's a good thought. It's funny because we do oftentimes think about ourselves as a bit of a growth shop, but we're not investing oftentimes with that structure of growth equity, where you're taking a back seat. But, my belief is, especially in these, smaller businesses, that in order to get to a margin of safety very quick, you have to grow them. Like I am so paranoid and scared the day I buy a business if it's not growing, because if it's not growing, like you're going to go, it's just not going to go well. So like immediately our thought going into any business is, how are we going to grow it? How are we going to grow it quickly? Like, what is the team we need? I don't mind if we drop EBITDA and go through a J curve, but we have to be growing, the business and getting it to scale very quickly. So I think that mentality resonates with a lot more growth equity guys and a lot more LBO folks, as you mentioned, and especially in these cases, Twin Peaks, we used debt, but, Ojos and Buff City, these were unlevered businesses.
But so what happens when you don't have growth? Plenty of deals will have a stagnant year, maybe a down year within a certain department. That's not the end of a business. We are taught to think long-term about this, right? How can 1 year be the perfect way to describe the evolution of a business?
I don't know. A year without growth is pretty scary to me. To me, I think I want to see things continuing to move forward, grow every year, unless you're making a conscious decision to say, I'm going to slow down in growth because of X, whatever X is. A lot of times that's, I need to be able to catch up and build my infrastructure. And that certainly happened to us before. We said, look, we need to slow things down a little bit to just catch up with, people and processes. And so sometimes you'll make a conscious decision there. But other than that, even thinking long term, I'm a big believer that you need to be pushing for the business. You need to be growing. What I find oftentimes in these businesses too is without that growth, you have a lot of people in your organization, if they're good and they're ambitious, they want other opportunities to continue to excel and get promoted in the business. And without growth, they may be left in a stagnant place, and thus you lose good talent. And so without that growth, you also have, a potential shift in culture. You potentially lose your good people. And so keeping your foot on the pedal is incredibly important to us.
You characterized in one of our earlier conversations independent sponsors as underdogs, and therefore, it's not pure power that allows you to be successful. I guess you have to be a clever David in the face of Goliaths. What did you mean?
I mean, if you take the extreme example of a one-man band or, a guy in a shingle, and you have to go sell yourself, whether to a broker or a founder, that you can not only come up with a deal for the business, go find the capital, help him do something. Assumably, if that person is rolling over equity, he has to believe in you and your capabilities. That's a slog. I think it still pins, a lot of independent sponsors as an underdog. And, I think it's going away a little bit, but the amount of times that I've even been called by larger private equity firms, making a pitch for, a company we owned, their bullets were like, we have money. We have a lot of money. We just raised a huge fund. And I was like, that means absolutely nothing to me. Like, I don't care if you have money. But, for that independent sponsor, it's just like, you've got a lot of work to do to get anything done. You have to fight against, the perceptions. You have to be able to both, execute a transaction, close it, raise the capital, ideally be thoughtful about, what the go forward strategy is, before you even close the transaction. It's a lot of work.
And so you mean when a private equity fund comes and say, we have a lot of money, you say that means nothing to you. But then you're expanding that and saying independent sponsors don't even have money, and hence the pressure on adding value in other ways.
Yeah. Say that again, Nicholas. I want to think about it.
Yeah. I think you brought up there that private equity differentiate themselves or are in the game because they have capital. An independent sponsor doing private equity on a deal-by-deal basis, signing up deals before they've syndicated the capital, they're not in the game because they have capital, because they don't have it. So there has to be other factors at play to be in the game.
Yeah, I think that's right. You have to, to me, you have to work harder. You have to be able to sell yourself better. You have to be able to sell, track record and a reputation. And an ability to be able to execute.
So what are ways that independent sponsors can differentiate themselves?
Yeah. I think when I'm on sometimes the other side of this equation and I'm looking at, potentially investing through another independent sponsor, what I love to see is someone who has domain experience, a good reputation, a very specific view and strategy towards, where the business is going to go under their ownership, and not a pie in the sky case of just some regurgitated, we're going to grow XYZ. But actual, well thought out, well researched, ideally already in flight, opportunities to build that business. So, I think from that perspective, like, that's what I love to see guys doing. I think, it depends on what the structure of a deal is with, a founder that's potentially exiting their business, but assuming that they're staying in it, and rolling over equity. A lot of times these guys want to know, are you going to take care of my business, or am I going to, make money on my rollover, and I think that necessarily means they have to have a belief in you and your capabilities.
Mike, the fact that you've bought businesses in perhaps we could call it unconventional areas, is that also part of the way that you differentiate, looking at targets that maybe are otherwise overlooked?
I think as an overall firm, that's one way we differentiate, because we're trying to be incredibly thoughtful about every business opposed to just, what's cool that day.
Yeah.
Or maybe what other folks are doing, and I just fundamentally find that it's just more rewarding for us, to go root out those opportunities, and oftentimes if it's, being passed over or it's an unturned rock, I think you end up having a better conversation. You get to know those founders better. You get to start building, a partnership and relationship with them, because they haven't been hounded, 100 times each day by somebody else saying, let's do something here. So, it's probably a little bit more of an older school version of doing things, but it works out great for us. It necessarily means that we're running at a lower volume, but we're able to find opportunities that I think are, reasonable value, and we get to know the people behind the business very well.
Well, I have to wonder too if this is your kind of self-identity as an entrepreneur manifesting itself, where you don't just bring the spreadsheet to these deals, you're bringing vision, kind of entrepreneurial vision to what these things are and can become, in a way that somebody who is more kind of an investor first might not.
I think that's where we've done pretty well, is because we all here have a good ability, to sit down with founders and other operators, and maybe I can't speak every last, vocabulary of their industry, but I can certainly sympathize with them as operators of businesses, as entrepreneurs, in what they go through. And we don't come at it from, the angle of, here's your, the numbers of your business, and, without being thoughtful about, what the business really is.
Mm-hmm.
It tangent to that, but I mean, one thing that's really big for me is that everybody that works with us on the Guideboat team either has to have worked in an operating business before, or if they haven't, they will be going in and working in an operating business that we own soon after joining us. And until you do that, I don't think you understand what happens in a business very well. It's a recipe for the ivory tower approach, which good for the guys that have done it, but it's just not our path.
For a last question here, Mike, so 2018 was the first deal. 2018 was the first deal. So we're now 6 years later. We all know that this model is more and more accepted, is more and more mainstream. Maybe not fully there yet. But what else have you seen in these 6 years of being in this space? What direction is being an independent sponsor, the independent sponsor ecosystem community moving?
Yeah, it's, I think there's, what I've seen is this significant graying of the different buckets that existed out there previously. And, if you take the different ends of the spectrum, and you have, these searchers, which have become pretty prominent, which is some version, of an independent sponsor. You have ETA and sponsors, and then even moving up to, co-invest rights within an existing, committed fund, or committed funds that are between funds that are setting up SPVs, for their deals. Like, I mean, there's this massive graying that's going on, on a broad basis. I think it's phenomenal for the country as a whole, because it gives more people more opportunities to become entrepreneurs and own businesses, and I think, generally speaking, we all understand that there's a huge generation of people that want to retire, sell their businesses, and may not have a succession plan. And so there's folks out there who are able to actually execute on that. I think it's a phenomenal thing. I think it's, something that makes, our country pretty unique and resilient. So it's exciting to see from that standpoint. On the other hand, it's incredibly competitive, which is really annoying. I wish this were easier, but it's getting, tougher and tougher. And that's okay. I think it's positive overall, but, I believe I mentioned to you guys, we're looking at some different ways of approaching our business right now. And one of those is, out of our value system and belief that people provide so much value to the business. There's such a high correlative factor to our returns and our success that, we asked ourselves one day, why do we keep searching for businesses and then hoping that there's like a good leader there? Instead of saying, why don't I go find a great leader, a great person? I still want to believe in their industry, but why don't we start people first and then go search for an opportunity? And so, this coming year, we intend to bring on, up to a half dozen different high quality leaders, into our organization, working hand in hand with us, who are employees of our company until we find, the right opportunity. And then they'd go, run those. And so we're really excited about that. I think it's going to be a bit of a unique path, but we're pumped about the journey, and we'll see how it goes.
And those people that you'll bring on coming from with industry experience as they do, so does that mean you'll go looking for a business in X industry because you have an operator on standby who's on your payroll actually and is waiting for their right opportunity? So are you matching X with X operator with X industry?
Exactly. So It's a far more top-down, thesis-driven approach, than a lot of the bottoms-up where we've done it in the past. And so we'll be hiring guys that are seasoned operators within their space. Other belief of mine is just that operators talk to operators better than finance guys. We try to hide the fact of doing what we do. There's I wear socks and not loafers. Sorry if anybody's wearing sockless loafers, but just the things that are the dead giveaways, we try to avoid those, and be able to connect with the folks that we're looking to acquire or build that relationship with. And I think an extension of that is bringing those type of people into our business so they can have those direct conversations.
What a fantastic story. Thank you so much for sharing it, and super inspiring to hear about how you have already had a really successful path as an independent sponsor, but you're thinking ahead. What are the ways that you can institutionalize Guideboat, and this operator and residence program is your next experiment, bringing in half a dozen searchers, or what you want to call them, in-house to find and run businesses in partnership with you. It makes all the sense in the world as you're trying to scale what you're already doing successfully.
Yeah, we think so, and I appreciate it.
Mike, if people are listening and want to get in touch with you about a deal, or maybe are interested in this operator program that you'll be investing in next year, where do you want them to go? LinkedIn to you directly, or Guideboat's website? How can people reach out?
Yeah, sure. I think LinkedIn, obviously pretty easy. Don't mind sharing emails. I think I make ours pretty publicly available. So always enjoy the conversations.
Mike Sutton, thank you again for coming on Meeting of the Minds. Congratulations on all your success so far. We look forward to following Guideboat from here on out.
Cool. I appreciate it, guys.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. For more like it, subscribe to Meeting of the Minds wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube. And check out Minds Capital, where Nicholas and I are partners alongside Max Lummis. Minds Capital invests equity in independent sponsored deals. So if you're a sponsor with a deal under LOI, please visit mindscapital.co to start a conversation. There's also an investor tab on our website with information about partnership opportunities and future fundraises. See you in the next episode.